Alrighty, so for week 6 that I'm still working, and I've gotten a little better job done working ahead this week. This week is a little more challenging because of code reviews and just all the activity that takes. But I was able to, at least here on Tuesday, get this out early, so I'm proud of myself today. And this is due, obviously, that week after code reviews. So this is awesome because now we're into the part of JS that is really where you spend the bulk of your time in learning this really important concept of how to deal with the browser, right? So dealing with the results of what you see as a rendered web page from a document, a DOM level, and being able to manipulate that. And so I'm going to show you what I've done and give you some options. So I've done 2 parts. Some of you may choose to do them together. Some of you may do one and then take an attempt at the other. And here's what I mean. And what I'm going to do in part 1 is I'm actually going to take some of the output that I had from my develop it 1 and just bring it into a file like he did with his notes, and then iterate over that to display it based on the user input. Now, mine's a little different than his, which I would expect each of ours to do a little differently. Okay, so I'll show you. So here's my output for this. So like my gameplay detail is my array of objects that I captured every time the game was played. And so I just grabbed some of that output. I placed it into the top of the file, which we're going to, actually right here is where it's at. I just have it rolled up, but that's where I just grabbed some of my output data from that other one. And then what I did is based on if it was player 1, it would show player 1, player 2, it would show player 2. And then additionally, the thing I did is I dynamically, and meaning I created the DOM elements. I didn't actually build them in the HTML file. I built them through JavaScript to actually do another filter so that you could filter then by like wins, right? You know what? I gotta, it's happened to me before. I have to figure out where in my logic I need to do this. It should be, how about, right, so it worked to where first you filter by player and then you select if you want to see tie, wins, or losses. Okay, so this, I think this is a good exercise to do. Ultimately, though, is what we're probably all going to want to do, and that's why I've made this attempt your logic, right? So the other thing is like, what you wrote, created your develop it 1 on. And though for me, it would be playing rock, scissors, paper, right? This would really just be a sub, page or maybe a subsection where the user could actually look at which ties, wins, or losses they had, or maybe just the number. So, but what I will most likely do, and that's the part I haven't done yet, is actually attempt to implement my logic, right? For whatever was my chosen topic in here, right? So anyway, and what I want you to do is I want you to create a subdirectory in Playground called W6 and then place your files in there. And in addition, if you'd like, because we want to see the output, right? Now we're actually getting into looking at the output. I used the tool I'm using. I know Jared had been using this last semester, and I found a product that would do a Chrome capture, and I'll show you in a second just how I did that. But let's go over the code before I do. All right, so here's the code for my app.js. Nothing really special in my index, although I will show you, and you can look at this, is that I have an input for the player to select the player, and then I have the game search, which is going to go above that, and then I have the player output. And I use this player output for both after you select by player and then select by game. So I use that same div, and that ID is important, of course. Okay, so let me show you the actual code itself just to walk you through what I did here. And by the way, there's my GIF file that I created. If you don't do the GIF file, just do a regular print screen, but it's more dynamic or more interactive to see that part. So here are all my just my array of objects for the gameplay from my game. I did use that filter concept that he showed because I think it's a nice way to do it. And I set up by player text and by game. I should be consistent and say, anyway, it's funny when you read your text, you realize I could have been more consistent. The one thing too I did differently than he did is wherever I needed a document query selector based on the ID, I just set those up at the top of my file. That way I didn't have to rewrite, and it made my code a little more, to me, clean. So then I set up the event listener, right? This is on the field. This is on the input field, the first input field right here. I set up that to, it's right here, right? To listen for input. And then I did on just change. I didn't do the where he was doing the text search. I just did change, and change in this case the event listener, so it listens for any change events, and change events are when you come out of the field. And then I grab whatever the user gave us, and then I render the detail, the player detail, passing in gameplay and filter. Which, by the way, you don't actually have to pass these around, but it's good because what you can do later is you can use different inputs, something I'm already thinking about. So then to display game, this is game filter. So down here would be display or render player detail. This is where, because the second time you run it, you want that output to be cleared up. And then I filter by player, where my player detail, because that's what the the filter is looking at each of them. I called it detail, so detail.player equal to. Now in this case, because what comes in off the input fields are string, I had to convert it to int by doing a parse int on there. And then that is where I could compare, because if you remember, my each player is a number, so I couldn't use the include as he had done. I do it on the game, but I couldn't do it here. And then I said if there was 0, then put no player found. If the length of this resulting array, and then filter.for each. So this is where I'm building the output, right? And then appending it into the DOM. And now once I do that, I actually display game filter so that I dynamically can place that game filter, right? So let me just redo this. So it's only after the player is selected, right, that you see the type of game filter. So if I wanted to see losses, right? So I build that dynamically. Oh, it's a little easier to look at it here. So what I do here is I build that dynamically, right? Just finding it here, right? So I actually do pass in what I've already filtered by player though. That way I don't have to run and find it again. So I'm passing the display, whatever I determined inside of the filtered player. So that player's data is the only thing that's being sent up into this function to display. And then this is where I build, I actually create the element input instead of, again, doing it in the HTML. I set the attribute. This is something new he didn't show. So I had to set the attribute for the ID, and I wanted a placeholder. And then I did append child. So I appended it into the DOM. And then I set up an event listener. So you don't have to have the event listeners, of course, setting on the global scope. You can set them here. Right? And so then once I'm listening and I get the input, then I render search detail by passing filtered player and filter. And when it comes back, I clear that field. So what does that mean when you clear the field? So if I hit 1 and hit out of it, then that clears that input field and the input is not hanging around, right? He showed that in the code. So because I had 2 times I did it, I needed to do it both times. And so here's where the final render does render through based on just the filtered player, and then it finds just the ones. Now in this case, I was able to filter based on the input field, and that's almost the exact thing he was showing. So the thing I already realized is that I could abstract away because this code for rendering is similar. And I think he does that in a future one as well. So I'll just kind of hold off a little bit. Okay, so that's my code. I've showed you the output. If you want to use the little thing here, you install, and Jared can show you the link. He uses one specifically for Windows. Because I don't run on Windows, I needed something that was more generic. So I just did a Chrome one. And then what I did is once you do it here and you hit you hit play, you only have 10 seconds, so you got to do it pretty quick. Took me a couple of times to do it. And then once you have it, you just save it as a GIF file locally. And so what I did after I saved it is I just put it up on the directory, and then just included it in the output. So, I think that's something fun to play with. All right, so the things I need to do here is I actually want to now work on, because I haven't attempted to do the logic, so that's the next thing I'm going to want to do. Again, all of our output, or all of our rendering here of looking at that data and rendering only the parts based on the user selection is what you're going to be doing this week. And additionally, attempting to get your logic for whatever you created into the browser. Okay, at whatever level, right? Give this an attempt. This is important because this actually helps prepare us for the last development for this class. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.